It was supposed to be an ordinary night. Officer Ramirez patrolled the dimly lit streets of his quiet neighborhood, the hum of his cruiser's engine blending with the distant murmur of the city. The kind of uneventful shift he'd grown used to. That is, until he saw her. A little girl, no older than 6, sitting alone on the sidewalk, her small frame trembling under the flickering street lamp. At first, he thought she was lost. But something in her large, tear-filled eyes told a different story. They were filled with something primal, fear. Real, unfiltered terror. Ramirez slowed the car, his pulse quickening. He stepped out cautiously, the gravel crunching under his boots as he approached her. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" His voice was soft, careful not to startle her. The girl didn't answer right away. She simply stared at him, her tiny hands clutching the hem of her tattered dress. Then, in a voice so faint it was almost swallowed by the night, she whispered 3 words that sent chills down his spine. "Save me. Please." Ramirez froze. Those 3 words were heavy, desperate, almost unnatural coming from someone so young. The air around them seemed to thicken, the street suddenly too quiet. He crouched to her level, his instincts screaming that something was horribly wrong. "It's okay. I'm here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" Her lips quivered, but she shook her head, glancing over her shoulder into the shadows as if expecting something, or someone. Ramirez followed her gaze but saw nothing. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. Grabbing his radio, Ramirez called for backup. His partner, Officer Thompson, was already nearby. "Thompson, I've got a situation here," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the unease curling in his gut. "Young girl, possibly endangered. I need you at the corner of Maple and 5th. Now." The girl's breathing quickened, and Ramirez knelt closer. "You're safe with me," he assured her. "No one's going to hurt you. Can you tell me your name?" "They'll come," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They'll find me." Before he could press further, headlights cut through the dark as Thompson's cruiser pulled up. Ramirez stood, waving his partner over. Thompson took one look at the girl and frowned. "What's going on here?" "I'm not sure yet," Ramirez admitted. "She won't tell me much, but she's scared. Really scared." The girl clung to Ramirez's leg as Thompson knelt down, her expression softening. "Hey, sweetie, we're here to help. Can you tell us where your parents are?" The girl hesitated, her gaze darting between them. Then, almost inaudibly, she muttered, "I don't have parents." Thompson's brow furrowed. "All right," she said gently. "Can you tell us where you live? Where you came from?" Instead of answering, the girl pointed down the street, toward the darkened horizon. "There," she said. Ramirez exchanged a glance with Thompson, who nodded. "We need to check it out," Ramirez said, his voice low. "But we can't leave her here alone." "Agreed. Let's get her in the car," Thompson replied. "We'll take her back to the station afterward." As Ramirez escorted the girl to his cruiser, she gripped his hand tightly. "Don't let them take me," she begged. Her plea was raw, and her fear was palpable. Ramirez's heart ached as he reassured her again. Thompson stayed behind, scanning the area for any immediate threats while Ramirez secured the girl. Suddenly, an elderly woman emerged from the shadows, her face pale and her movements jittery. That child!" she exclaimed, pointing a trembling finger at the girl. Ramirez turned sharply, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "Ma'am, do you know her?" The woman nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She went missing years ago. Everyone thought she was dead." Ramirez felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What do you mean, missing?" he asked, his voice tight. The woman's hands trembled as she clutched a rosary around her neck. "They took her. The people in the big house. They take the children, and they don't come back." Ramirez and Thompson exchanged a grim look. The big house had been a local legend, whispered about in hushed tones. A place of unanswered questions and lingering dread. "Looks like we're heading there sooner than we thought," Ramirez muttered, adrenaline coursing through him. As they prepared to leave, the girl's voice cut through the tension one last time. "They'll know you're coming," she said, her tone eerily calm. The words sent a shiver down Ramirez's spine. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it wouldn't be ordinary. It wouldn't be safe. But it was too late to turn back now. As Officer Ramirez and Thompson sped toward the so-called big house, an urgent call crackled over their radio. "Be advised, we received multiple reports of strange activity near your location. Do not proceed without backup." Ramirez gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Great," he muttered. "Now the whole city's talking about ghosts." But it wasn't ghosts that made the girl's pale face suddenly twist in terror. From the back seat, her trembling voice cut through the tension. "They're watching." Ramirez glanced at Thompson, who was already checking her sidearm. "We're going in," she said, her tone resolute. "Legends or not, someone's going to answer for this." As the car approached the looming silhouette of the mansion, a chill seemed to settle over the air. The house wasn't just big, it was massive, with towering iron gates and windows so dark they reflected nothing. Ramirez killed the headlights, parking just out of sight. "You stay here," he instructed the girl. "Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone but us. You won't come back," she said softly, her words hanging in the air like a curse. Ignoring the icy grip of her prediction, Ramirez and Thompson slipped through the gates, their flashlights cutting narrow paths in the darkness. The mansion loomed above them, each step echoing like a drumbeat as they approached the heavy wooden door. It creaked open before they could even knock. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. "Clear your corners," Thompson whispered, her weapon drawn. Ramirez nodded, his own flashlight sweeping across the vast entryway. It was disturbingly empty. No furniture. No decorations. Just walls adorned with faded wallpaper that seemed to ripple as they moved. "It's too quiet," Ramirez muttered. Thompson motioned toward a staircase. "Let's split up. You take the main floor. I'll check upstairs." Ramirez hesitated. "Stay in radio contact," he said firmly. "And call if you see anything or anyone." As Thompson disappeared up the stairs, Ramirez moved deeper into the house. His boots creaked against the floorboards, each step feeling heavier than the last. Then, just as he rounded a corner, a faint sound stopped him cold. A whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Leave, now." He swung his flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. The beam illuminated an empty hallway, its walls lined with strange, childlike drawings scratched into the plaster. They depicted figures, tall, dark shapes towering over smaller, faceless ones. A chill ran down his spine, but before he could move, his radio crackled to life. "Ramirez, I found something. Second floor. Room at the end of the hall." "On my way," he replied, quickening his pace. But as he reached the staircase, a blood-curdling scream echoed from upstairs. "Thompson!" He bolted up the stairs, his weapon drawn. The scream had come from the last room on the right. Kicking the door open, Ramirez found Thompson standing in the center of the room, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "What happened?" he demanded. She didn't answer, her gaze locked on something behind him. Ramirez turned slowly, his flashlight revealing a massive wardrobe pushed against the far wall. The doors were slightly ajar, and from the crack, he saw it. A single eye staring back at him. "Get down!" Ramirez shouted, lunging toward Thompson as the wardrobe burst open. A figure darted out, its movements unnaturally fast. Ramirez fired, but the shots echoed into the void as the figure disappeared into the darkness. Panting, Thompson scrambled to her feet. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Ramirez admitted, his own heart pounding. "But we're not alone." The scream wasn't the worst sound Ramirez had heard that night. It was the silence that followed. Heavy. Suffocating. Unnatural. Thompson's voice came over the radio, shaking but clear. Ramirez, there's a hidden door. I don't know how I missed it before. Where are you? He snapped, his grip tightening on his flashlight. The basement, she replied. Far wall. Hurry. Ramirez didn't wait. He bolted down the stairs, adrenaline surging as the mansion seemed to close in around him. Every shadow felt alive, every creak of the floorboards a threat. When he reached the basement door, it was slightly ajar. He pushed it open cautiously, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dense darkness. Thompson? He called out, his voice echoing. Over here, she answered, her tone low and tense. She stood near the far wall, where peeling wallpaper barely concealed the outline of a door. Ramirez's gut twisted. This wasn't on the blueprints. Help me, she said, gesturing to the wall. Together, they pulled at the edges of the wallpaper, revealing an old wooden door with rusted hinges. Locked? He asked. Thompson shook her head, then hesitated. No. That's what's weird. It's open. Ramirez's stomach churned as he reached for the handle. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passage descending into the earth. The air that escaped was damp and cold, carrying a faint metallic tang. Blood? This keeps getting better, Ramirez muttered, gripping his weapon tighter. The two officers exchanged a glance before stepping inside. The walls of the passage were lined with crumbling bricks, and the only light came from their flashlights. As they moved deeper, the space grew colder, the silence almost unbearable. Then they heard it, faint whispers, like voices carried on the wind. Did you hear that? Thompson whispered. Keep moving, Ramirez replied, though every nerve in his body screamed at him to turn back. The passage ended at another door, this one heavier, reinforced with iron. Ramirez hesitated, his instincts screaming that whatever lay beyond was something they weren't prepared for. Ready? He asked. Thompson nodded, though her hand trembled slightly on her weapon. Ramirez pushed the door open, and they were immediately hit with the smell of decay. The room beyond was vast and circular, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. In the center stood a large wooden table, and on it. Oh my God! Thompson breathed, lowering her weapon slightly. Photographs. Hundreds of them. All of children. Some smiling, others with expressions of pure terror. Ramirez's stomach turned as he recognized one of the faces, the girl they'd found outside. What is this place? Thompson asked, her voice trembling. Evidence, Ramirez said grimly, pulling out his phone to take pictures. We need to get. The door slammed shut behind them. Ramirez spun around, his weapon raised, but there was no one there. Just the heavy, suffocating darkness. Who's there? He barked. The whispers returned, louder this time, echoing off the walls. Words he couldn't quite make out. Thompson backed toward the table, her flashlight flickering. Ramirez, we're not alone, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Something moved in the shadows. A figure. Too tall, too thin, its movements jerky and unnatural. Ramirez fired, but the bullets seemed to pass right through it. The figure vanished, the whispers growing louder. We need to get out of here, Thompson said, grabbing Ramirez's arm. But before they could move, the single bulb above them exploded, plunging the room into complete darkness. Ramirez felt Thompson's grip tighten on his arm as the whispers became a deafening roar. Run! Ramirez shouted, pulling her toward the door. They fumbled in the dark, the whispers now sounding like screams. When they finally reached the door, it wouldn't budge. It's locked! Thompson cried, her voice panicked. Ramirez threw his weight against it, and with a final, desperate shove, it burst open. The two officers stumbled back into the passage, slamming the door behind them. The whispers stopped instantly, replaced by an eerie silence. Panting, they leaned against the wall, their hearts racing. Ramirez looked at Thompson, who was clutching something in her hand. It was one of the photographs from the table. We need to get this back to the station, she said, her voice shaky but determined. This isn't over. Ramirez nodded, But as they started back toward the surface, a chilling thought struck him. If that wasn't over, what else was waiting for them? You took something that doesn't belong to you. A cold voice echoed as Ramirez and Thompson emerged from the hidden passage, breathless and shaken. They spun around, weapons raised, but the hallway was empty. The voice didn't belong to anyone they could see. We're leaving, Ramirez barked into the shadows. But trust me, we'll be back with reinforcements. A low, mocking laugh reverberated through the air. Then the girl's voice came faintly over the radio. They won't let you leave. Thompson's blood ran cold. The kid, she whispered. She's still outside. What if they're going after her? Ramirez didn't wait. Move! He shouted, bolting toward the exit. They raced through the twisting corridors of the mansion, the walls seeming to close in around them. The house felt alive, pulsating with an almost tangible malice. Every step echoed as if something was chasing them, something unseen but very real. When they finally burst out into the night, their hearts sank. The patrol car was empty, the back door wide open. The girl was gone. No, Thompson muttered, her voice thick with panic. We left her for 2 minutes. Spread out, Ramirez ordered, scanning the shadows with his flashlight. The oppressive silence of the mansion had followed them outside, and now the entire neighborhood seemed unnaturally quiet. Then came the scream. High-pitched. Terrified. The girl. Ramirez bolted toward the sound, Thompson close on his heels. It led them to the edge of the mansion's grounds, where a rusted metal hatch lay partially concealed beneath overgrown vines. The scream had come from below. Without hesitation, Ramirez yanked the hatch open, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Stay here, he told Thompson, but she shook her head. Not a chance. The two climbed down together, the air growing colder with each rung. When they reached the bottom, their flashlights revealed a long, narrow tunnel. The walls were damp, and the air reeked of mildew and something else, something far worse. The girl's sobs echoed from deeper within. We're coming, Ramirez called, his voice firm but steady. Just stay where you are. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading them deeper underground. The sobs grew louder, mixed with whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Words they couldn't understand, spoken in a language that sounded ancient and wrong. Finally, they found her. She was huddled in the corner of a small, circular chamber, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. But she wasn't alone. Standing just behind her, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. Its outline was faint, almost transparent, but its presence was undeniable. Get away from her! Ramirez shouted, raising his weapon. The figure didn't move, but the whispers grew louder, filling the chamber like a deafening chorus. The girl looked up, her tear-streaked face pale and terrified. It won't let me go, she sobbed. Thompson stepped forward, pulling the girl into her arms. We've got you, she whispered, though her voice trembled. The figure began to shift, its form growing more distinct. Ramirez fired, the gunshots echoing off the walls, but the bullets had no effect. The figure only grew larger, its features taking on a grotesque, inhuman shape. Ramirez, we have to go! Thompson screamed, dragging the girl toward the tunnel. Ramirez backed away, his flashlight shaking in his hand as the figure advanced. They ran, the whispers chasing them like a storm. The tunnel seemed endless, the air growing thicker with each step. When they finally reached the ladder, Ramirez shoved Thompson and the girl upward, turning to face the darkness one last time. The figure stopped at the edge of the light, its form flickering like a dying flame. Then, in a voice that chilled him to his core, it spoke. She was never yours to save. With that, the figure vanished, the whispers falling silent. Ramirez climbed the ladder, his heart pounding. When they emerged into the night, the air felt lighter, as if the house had released them. But the girl's sobs continued, a haunting reminder that the nightmare was far from over. As they drove away, Ramirez glanced at the rearview mirror. For a split second, he thought he saw a shadowy figure standing in the mansion's doorway, watching them leave. He didn't say anything. But deep down, he knew they hadn't seen the last of it. "I'm not sure we made it out," Ramirez muttered, gripping the steering wheel tighter as the patrol car sped down the darkened road. Thompson shot him a sharp look. "We're out. The girl's safe. That thing is back in the house where it belongs." But her voice lacked conviction. In the back seat, the girl sat curled against the door, her tear-streaked face pale and blank. She hadn't said a word since they left the mansion. The police radio crackled to life, but instead of dispatch, it was static, piercing, rhythmic, almost like a pattern. Ramirez frowned and turned the volume down, but the static only grew louder. Then, faintly through the noise, came the same voice they'd heard in the mansion. "You think you've won?" Thompson's hand went to her weapon. "Tell me I'm imagining that," she said. Before Ramirez could respond, the patrol car's headlights flickered. Then the engine sputtered and died, leaving them stranded on the empty road. The silence that followed was deafening. "No," Ramirez whispered, trying the ignition again. "Nothing." He turned to Thompson. "Stay with her." As Ramirez stepped out of the car, the air felt heavier, charged with an unnatural energy. His flashlight barely cut through the oppressive darkness. He circled the car, scanning the area, but the road was empty. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. From inside the car, Thompson's muffled voice shouted, "Ramirez, get back in here! Now!" He spun around, his flashlight catching a fleeting shadow darting across the road. It moved too fast to be human. Ramirez hurried back to the car, slamming the door behind him. "What did you see?" he demanded. "It's here," Thompson said, her voice shaking. "Whatever it is, it followed us." The girl finally looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "It doesn't stop," she whispered. "It never stops." The car's radio crackled again, this time with a new message. A child's voice, eerily calm and detached. "Bring her back. She belongs to us." Ramirez and Thompson exchanged a glance, both realizing the same thing. They hadn't escaped. They'd only delayed the inevitable. "We're not taking her back," Thompson said firmly, drawing her weapon. "Whatever this thing is, we'll face it. Together." The girl began to cry, clutching Thompson's arm. "You can't stop it," she sobbed. "It's too strong." "We'll see about that," Ramirez said, starting the car again. This time, it roared to life. But as he hit the gas, the road ahead seemed to stretch infinitely, the trees on either side blurring into darkness. "What's happening?" Thompson asked, panic creeping into her voice. "I don't know," Ramirez admitted. The speedometer climbed, but they didn't seem to be moving. The trees, the road, even the stars in the sky, everything stayed the same. Then the girl screamed, pointing at the windshield. "It's here!" A shadowy figure stood in the middle of the road, its form towering and grotesque. Ramirez slammed on the brakes, but the car skidded to a stop just inches from the figure. It didn't move. Instead, it raised a hand, its long, spindly fingers pointing directly at the girl. "Give her back," it said, its voice a guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the car. Ramirez opened the door, stepping out with his weapon drawn. "Leave her alone!" he shouted. The figure tilted its head, as if amused. "You can't save her. She is marked." "Marked for what?" Thompson demanded, stepping out beside Ramirez. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it dissolved into a swirling mass of shadows, surging toward the car. Ramirez and Thompson fired, but the bullets passed through harmlessly. The shadows engulfed the car, plunging everything into total darkness. Ramirez could hear the girl screaming, Thompson shouting his name, but he couldn't see anything. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the darkness lifted. They were back on the road, the car parked as if nothing had happened. The girl was unconscious in the back seat, but otherwise unharmed. Ramirez and Thompson exchanged a look, their faces pale and drawn. "What now?" Thompson asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ramirez didn't answer. He started the car and drove, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the rearview mirror, a shadow flickered for just a moment before disappearing. They weren't sure where they were going. They only knew one thing. The fight wasn't over.